Do short theme song intro. Hello, welcome to Left of the Box. Bonjour, bienvenue. I'm Sandy. As many people who are on the progressive Twitter of Canada may have noticed a bit of a pattern of people, potential candidates for the election federally and provincially, people who are outspoken, people who are progressive, often young, many of them have been getting rejected for becoming a candidate. They haven't been able to pass the vetting. Well, I sat down with one of these people to talk about his story and also talk about my story about how the NDP has handled the situation. I'm sharing my story because I want the NDP to be better. I want them to select candidates that energize the base, who are passionate, who are eager, who know the issues firsthand. What they have been doing recently has been heartbreaking. And part of the reason why I haven't really spoken out about it is because there are still lots of wonderful people within the party who are good, who are outspoken, who slipped in somehow. And I want them to succeed. I feel if the NDP were to succeed, Canada would be in a much better position. But what they did to me personally is atrocious, as you will find out in this interview. I never got an apology from them. I never got an acknowledgement from them. And I know that because of what happened, the likelihood of me being a candidate is, in the future, is not a possibility. Not with the NDP, at least. So please watch this video and let the NDP know what you think. Let them know where your values lie. Let them know that you would support and actually fight for them if they start fighting for you.
My name is Sam Kaplun. I'm a 19-year-old university student at Western, and I am the president of the NDP riding associations in Eglinton-Lawrence, which is a riding in Midtown Toronto. And I'm also the president of the NDP Campus Club at Western, though that's a much smaller role. And I was hoping to be running as the Ontario NDP candidate in Eglinton-Lawrence in the upcoming provincial election, but unfortunately, I failed the party's vetting process, so I wasn't allowed to move forward and seek the nomination here.
Okay, so I saw on social media you've been working towards this for a long time, and also welcome to Left of the Box.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I've been following you on social media, so I've been seeing that you've been working towards this for quite some time. And as a youth, like, we definitely need that more in the NDP because most parties are starting to age out, and it's always good to have, you know, the younger generations excited about politics, excited to get in because, you know, the needs of your generation are going to be different than the needs of my generation and the needs of other generations. And it's important to have all those voices at the table. So why don't you start by just telling me why you wanted to become the candidate?
For sure. Well, it actually started, I first volunteered for the NDP pretty much on a whim during the 2019 federal election. I just volunteered for my local candidate, Alexandra Nash, who is a 20-year-old university student themselves. And for some reason, until before, when I met Alex, it hadn't previously clicked that running for office was something that young people could and should do. And I don't know, pretty much since then, running for the NDP in you know, the riding where I've lived my entire life has been, I guess, a sort of dream of mine. And you know, after that election, I stuck around, joined on the riding association as their vice president, and you know, helped run things, helped make the riding association active again because there hadn't been much of an NDP presence in Eglinton-Lawrence for the past several years, and the riding's never been very much of a home for the NDP. It's pretty firm liberal territory that will occasionally go conservative narrowly. but a lot of the riding is pretty wealthy, so those folks aren't interested in the NDP, and then even the more working class and poor areas are pretty staunchly liberal. And so that actually left a great deal of room for myself and a few other young people to basically take over the riding association and just sort of do things our own way in the community. And it had been going pretty well for the past year and a half. I became the president in December, and I initially voiced my intention to seek the nomination here back in. Actually, that's not the question you were asking me. The question you were asking me was why I wanted to run.
Oh, we'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Yeah,
but
I'll get
also,
into the chronology.
what drew you to the NDP to start with?
Well, they simply seemed like the best progressive option available. I just, at the time, was someone who generally felt politically progressive. Now I've, moved more firmly to the left since then. But I don't know. I just saw like, hey, I need to get some more volunteering under my belt because I'd have done a lot throughout my younger years, but not as much in my last years of high school. And I thought this is a great way to try and do something good for my community.
Mhm.
And, thinking about the general NDP platform policies, things like post-secondary education and the environment, expanding the welfare state, those are all things that are, as someone who cares about what happens to the people around me, it's something that's important to me. And I thought the NDP was the best option out of all the political parties as far as those policy areas are concerned. And I've pretty much stuck around since then. And even though I've certainly had my fair share of disagreements with the party, both in matters of policy and, of course, as far as things are handled internally, given my own personal situation, I've stuck around because the actual membership, the people who make up the party, the volunteers, the people who work on riding associations, voters even, they're some of the most fantastic people I've ever met. People who are truly dedicated and principled, and the only reason they're there giving away all this time, in their spare time, is because they also care very much about their own communities and trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And I've made lots of friends in the party, and I don't think there's anywhere else, at least at the moment, where I think there's a better capacity for genuine progressive change than the NDP.
I know for me, because I have my own experiences with the party, and part of the reason why I've been so reluctant to kind of go public with it is because of the wonderful individuals that are in the party. Because there are great people within the party, but then there just seems to be this leadership that is taking the party in a direction that most people don't want to go. And I'm worried about when I talk about my story that it's going to drag down somebody that I like somebody in the party that's a good person. So I tend to be a little bit more reluctant to actually speak about what they did, but what they did to me this last time was just beyond the pale, I guess. But why don't you start talking about how you started to apply to become the candidate in that process, and give us a little bit more information about that.
Yeah, and everything you just said was also completely correct. But I initially wanted to run federally because there was a federal election coming up, and I had submitted the papers and everything. But because of the uncertain timing with the election and the fact that I wouldn't be able to run if the election fell during the school year, I decided that I would try and run provincially instead. I informed the Ontario NDP of that in June of last year, June 2021. And it took 2 months for me to receive an interview, followed by the actual package with all of the forms that I had to fill out so that my vetting process could actually begin. So although I did follow up with my organizer a couple of times asking for updates during July and early August, basically nothing happened during that period. We didn't have any other people at the time who'd even expressed interest in seeking the nomination here. And in fact, at the time, I was hoping that we would have been able to hold a nomination meeting around the end of the federal election, which fell in September ultimately. So I've submitted my stuff at the end of August, and then over the past 6 months, I followed up many times, and in fact, including the times I followed up between June and August. So from June to a couple of weeks ago in March, I followed up either with my organizer or someone else from the party brass 14 times over the course of those 8 months without hearing a single word on the progress of my vetting or on the progress of our general candidate search and nomination efforts in the riding. Yeah, for those 8 months, I was given absolutely no information before finally being told, after basically pestering the party to get in touch with me about it, that I was rejected.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, I was impatient, and if we wanted to have even a remote shot of winning a riding like Eglinton-Lawrence, then I needed to start campaigning, several months in advance
Mm-hmm.
before I, would even be sure that I could seek the nomination, which of course in the end I wasn't able to do. So I started getting out there and canvassing all the time, often alone, simply because I wasn't gonna, recruit members or volunteers without a guarantee that they would actually be able to, vote to nominate me in the end.
I know that feeling.
Uh, yeah, and in fact, I did sign up a few close family members and friends last year, assuming the nomination would be in 2021. So I basically wasted their money.
Mm-hmm.
But I knocked on around 2,000, 2,500 doors between October and January, and that constituted probably 75% of the doors we knocked on as a riding since the conclusion of the federal election. So we have a small team, and our election campaign, or what was our election campaign, was basically totally reliant on me specifically, just because everyone else was either too busy or too old and retired to simply actually put in that much time and energy into doing things like door knocking and outreach.
Yeah. In your writing, all the members in it, they were supportive of you, they like you, they wanted you as the candidate. Is that it?
So, with one exception, because one other person is also still being vetted, who is a member of the riding executive, though they actually did sign our letter, which I'll get to as well. Obviously, like, they, as riding executives, I don't think they can officially take a stance necessarily, but they basically, all of them were behind me and hoping that I would be the candidate, which is why I was able, like, every single one of them, including my potential opponent, was opposed to the candidate search team's decision to reject me. So yeah, finally, I'm constantly emailing them asking for updates. And finally, I left a voicemail at the party headquarters asking to be put in touch with candidate search. This would have been, I guess, maybe 3 weeks ago now. And I got a call 2 days later from the head of the candidate search team, Jesse McCauley, telling me that I'd been rejected because of my social media comportment. Those were the exact words she used to describe it. And the only example she gave me, I asked repeatedly, could you at least give me one more example? And she just told me, I'm not going to go through the whole report with you. Was that in April of last year, I had liked someone else's tweet. I didn't even retweet it or say anything myself using this language. I'd liked someone else's tweet calling Doug Ford a murderer. This was at the height of deaths in long-term care. And of course, his government has been characterized by cuts, at least when inflation and per capita funding is accounted for, cuts to healthcare, education, and welfare. And he's responsible for deaths.
At the beginning of the pandemic, they had to call the military into the long-term care homes here to get that under control. When they arrived, they found 26 people had died of dehydration, which is just, there is no excuse for that. They just needed water. And so to not, like, that is Doug Ford, that is his policies, that is what he did. So the term social murderer and things of that sort, I think it's very appropriate.
Absolutely. And to play devil's advocate to myself, I suppose, for a moment, like, there is a lot of legitimacy to the ostensible reason that they gave me, which is that, the opposition parties will probably pick this up. Although, I have my doubts as to whether the moment someone seeks their intention to even seek the nomination somewhere, they immediately go and dig up every single thing they can find on a person. Seems like an inefficient use of resources, but, it's very possible that opposition parties could have found it. And then, I could very easily defend myself on something like that because, as we've just discussed, on the substance, it's totally correct. But if, then reporters in the media start, asking Andrea Horwath questions about it, that's time that they could otherwise be using to discuss other policy matters and important issues where they instead have to be defending their candidate from a perceived controversy.
Yeah. We should also keep in mind that in your riding, the NDP making it forward, probably a long shot. the opposition parties aren't necessarily going to target you and dig into your past as
For
much
sure.
as they would the other candidates who are in the lead type thing.
Yeah.
And the thought of, the Andrea being bothered over somebody in one writing for liking a single tweet, like that is one of the
Mhm.
things that also bothered me about the NDP was they don't trust us to defend our stances.
Exactly. That's just it. Because what I was getting at is that there is some truth to that concern of theirs, but it's overblown to a frankly absurd extent because, for one, the odds that they find this are still relatively low. And again, there were probably other things that I said on social media that could have caused problems for them. Not that I know of anything in particular. Um, but for one, again, it's totally defensible, and it would be very easy to spin this in a way that makes the NDP look good,
Mhm.
because the facts are on our side. It's true that the Doug Ford government is responsible for excess deaths in a variety of policy areas. Uh, and secondly, I would be more than happy to just defend my own opinions myself. I don't need the leader to come to my defense for something like that. She can just defer those questions to me if she wanted to.
Mhm.
But I think that what they're trying to do is a fool's errand, anyways, because no matter what they do, they're never going to be able to present a totally polished, sanitized slate of candidates with zero controversies. And, and besides, the media is not going to be friendly to the NDP regardless of how perfect or clean their candidates are. So, for one, I think it's just the cons outweigh the pros with these sorts of decisions. Uh, and then, of course, you're preventing a lot of young, outspoken, otherwise marginalized people from running. I'm not even aware of how many candidates the party's running this time around who are under 30.
Yeah, and another one of my frustrations is like I know with me I express my interest way early. And instead of like taking these people who are passionate, who want to get involved earlier, like months ahead of time, so you actually have time to get into the community, to promote yourself and all this sort of stuff, they wait until the absolute last minute,
Hmm.
which just, you're starting at a much further distance back than the rest of the candidates because you'll have the incumbent who's already been there for, the past sitting. And, maybe the people from the other parties have already been campaigning and stuff. And now suddenly, like with the last federal election, they called the election and they still hadn't filled all the seats. Like they still hadn't filled all the
Yep.
ridings with somebody.
Yeah, we didn't get our last federal election. We didn't have a candidate till after the writ drop,
Mm-hmm.
though that was partially not our fault. Like there wasn't anything we could have done differently per se, but like our own local candidate search team hadn't found anyone, so we just had to get someone from another
Mm-hmm.
riding to run. They ended up being a good candidate,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean the fact we not only do we not have a candidate, not only do we not have a nomination meeting scheduled, we don't even have a single person who's been approved to seek the nomination.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're what is it, a month away from the writ drop? So, uh, like right now, we have a election planning committee, as does just about every other riding association, but we don't really have a campaign to run. Uh, we I was hoping to start, recruiting members and volunteers the moment that I was approved to seek the nomination.
Mm-hmm.
I basically called through our entire lists, but
Yeah.
uh,
With my,
we've kind of been shot in the foot.
yeah, with me and my experience, uh, I first attempted to become the candidate back in 2019, the federal election then, and I did pass the vetting then, and I did become a nominee. What happened during that process is a video all in itself, but to say the odds were put against me is putting it mildly. It was clear they did not want me as the candidate. But at that time, I had no social media presence or anything, so there's nothing that they could get me on there. And I'm an active member in the community. I do volunteer work. I'm well known through my community. So there was no real reason why they should have rejected me for vetting. But one of the things that really got to me during that was I had to hide the fact that I'm polyamorous because I had a published article at the Vanier Institute of Family about polyamory, and they asked me to take that link down.
They told you to, but they asked you to take the link down. They specifically asked you also not to share the fact that you're polyamorous personally.
what they were saying is they didn't think that, that would be something that people could attack me on. And
That's
that,
bad.
yeah, it's something that people could attack me on, so it's best not to bring it up type thing. Which to me, it's like, again, like, I have no issue with being polyamorous and I can defend that. Like, that is part of who I am. So that was a blow back in that one. But there were other things that happened and things that happened on a personal level that just kind of left me in a very horrible situation. But then, I moved on. I started my channel. Things started developing. And then the person that I lost, and I lost by, just a sliver of a margin too. She was moving back out of province because she wasn't from here. And she got a very fantastic job offer back in her home province, and she took that. So then suddenly we knew we would not have a candidate for the upcoming federal election. And 2 weeks after she announced that she was going back home, there was the AGM, and I attended that, and not a single person acknowledged me. Like, nobody said, "Oh, well, we have in there a potential candidate here." Like, they even said, "If anyone knows of anyone who could be a candidate, let me know."
That's not great.
And I'm like right there, like that was kind of my test to see like if they really wanted me. But no one acknowledged me. So I kind of put it in the back of my mind and I wasn't really thinking about it until it got really close to the election, and the riding chair approached me and said that he would love for me to be the candidate, because the people who supported me, they really supported me because I had the energy. I gave one of the best political speeches many of them saw. Like, people would see me months after the fact, not remember my name, but remember that speech type thing. And I thought, you know what? Why not? Why not give it a shot? I was in a very tricky spot in my life at that time because I was having to move out of my apartment, not by choice. Developers bought the building and they were moving us out.
Wow.
Um, so I was dealing with that at the time, but I still filled out the paperwork. But since then, I've had quite the social media presence.
So they had the excuse.
Well, the way that it unfolded, though, because again, it was getting really close to the election, and I was the only one to have papers in, and somebody on the vetting team told me I was going to pass the vetting and become the candidate. They also told the riding chair this. So we started planning for me to become the candidate. And I actually started to hope that this was going to happen, that my dream, because the previous time I had been working towards it for like a year and a half. And so this was just kind of like, maybe this is going to be my shot now. And I was told. So we started putting work into it. I started, I changed my little logo here to an orange background instead of like a purple background just to get ready, like just to get all the graphics ready. I even had an announcement video done and ready
Wow.
to go. And then 3 days later, I get a call saying I would not pass the vetting.
And did they tell you why?
Basically, I speak my mind and I have a sense of humor.
That's what they said.
The speak my
Or
mind
that's
definitely is something that she said.
And it's something they don't want.
Yeah, and some of my tweets are sarcastic, some are humorous, some have curse words.
Oh no.
And sometimes I combine that. But I've also been critical of the NDP in certain situations, certain bills that they voted for that I don't agree with. But I tried to argue that this would show the NDP has a lot of integrity and strength if they're willing to have members who speak their mind, who don't necessarily agree on everything. They're capable of embracing people because we do generally have the same shared values. We want to do the same things. And the woman who was talking to me about this, she was one of the ones that said that she was at the previous nomination meeting and she was just blown away by that speech that I gave. But in the end, they're like, no, you can't. We're not going to let you pass the vetting. And the election had basically been called at that point. And so I was told that I had the choice of voluntarily retracting my papers, or if I decided to, what's the word when you go after it? Appeal it. If I chose to appeal it, the likelihood of me ever becoming a candidate in the federal or provincial NDP again was slim to none.
Just because you would have had appealed it.
I appealed it because I didn't think it was right. I didn't think it was right for them to do that to me. And even though there is a certain amount of days that you get to appeal it, they had already contacted the riding chair and more or less appointed him to be the candidate without vetting, without going through the same process, without a vote. They just
Wow.
made him the candidate. And that wasn't even like, I didn't even have a chance to appeal it first before they did this. And in my letter, I stated, like, I understand it's too late at this point because they've already announced him. The election has already started. So I know it's too late for me to run this time, but for the future. And I just wanted some acknowledgement of what they did to me with that, oh yeah, you're going to get it, things are great. And then just to have that ripped away from me. And that was, again, in the same week I was moving when I didn't want to, and my cat was sick and the vet was trying to make an appointment to put her down.
Oh my God. That's brutal.
I had a very rough week that week. Luckily, the place I moved to is quite nice and my cat pulled through. So, but so then I also then had to suddenly deal with the fact that any political ambition I had is now gone. Like, I won't be able to run for them pretty much ever again. And so just having that crushing realization, and in my letter, I just wanted an acknowledgement of it. I wanted them to acknowledge that they at least did this, that somebody with, mental health issues and stuff, the worst thing you could do is give them hope and then rip it away like that. And
Yeah, it's
in their reply, it was just a standard copy paste reply of, oh, we've reviewed your file and we agree with the decision. They didn't answer my question. They didn't acknowledge anything. It was just a standard copy paste. And that was it.
yeah, it makes the way that I was treated look like, well, fair. Yeah, that's brutal. And I think the common theme between all of the branches of the NDP, and I imagine that this is also similarly the case with the other political parties, except maybe the Greens. If they have to make a choice between how they perceive their central branding, image, messaging campaign, and they have to choose between that and any of the local campaign stuff, they're going to choose the central campaign every time. They're going to prioritize having the least controversial candidate in X riding rather than someone who's the best candidate for that local riding but poses even the tiniest conceivable threat to the central campaign messaging or image. And I think obviously that's a pretty large strategic miscalculation.
Mm-hmm. We need people who are passionate, who can get people out, who's one of the folks in town, because people want that. People want more progressive policies in place.
Mm-hmm.
And
but no one really loves the NDP brand per se, but they like the policies behind it.
No, they're like neoliberal lights at this point because they just seem to be moving more and more center, which is just not doing them any favors. They need to be moving in a more progressive manner because even this deal they struck up with the Liberals, I'm looking at that like, that's a win to some, sure, but all you're doing is holding the Liberals accountable for the promises they already made. Like, there's not really an NDP stamp of like, this is our values here. Like, they just happen to agree with these promises that the Liberals made, and the Liberals' promises are half measures at that.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is definitely the dental care, even though it's not yet universal within conceivable future.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that it obviously, is we don't feel it's going to go far enough because,
Mm-hmm.
the Liberals aren't going to agree to everything. And it's really hard for me to gauge whether I should be disappointed in the NDP for this or not, because I don't think they could have gotten much of a better deal than they did. And I don't think there's anything they could have done to get their policies enacted without signing the deal either. So it's kind of a no harm, no foul situation. But especially because I think I saw a tweet from Merritt Stiles saying that they asked specifically for guaranteed livable income and electoral reform, and they were flat out told no.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have really liked in particular, because I think this would have been something the Liberals might have agreed to and would have been pretty achievable, is just, knock off, say, 10 of the items, 10 of the calls to action from the TRC report, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. Because a lot of those policies are, as far as money and resources are concerned, at least, pretty small. And it's kind of shocking to me that more of them haven't been achieved, and it would have been a huge PR win for both parties.
Yeah, like I also get that it's not like the NDP have any real power, and basically all they're doing is announcing to the public is, you guys don't have to go through an election for the next while, unless they disagree with something, and then in that case, it will be the NDP's fault. Because if the Liberals
100%.
go back on something and the NDP try calling them out, and then suddenly there's a confidence vote or something, then it's going to be the NDP's fault that there's an election, as opposed to the Liberals not doing what they said they would. And like personally, I don't even really see the need why they needed to announce this, why they needed to have this agreement, because it's not a coalition. It's just saying, yeah, we're going to get along for a while. Whereas if they didn't have this agreement, then they could still vote for these things when they came through and still push for them to be more progressive publicly, like actually go and make a big deal about it. I do think that the dental care needs to be universal, like absolutely, hands down. And it's driving me crazy that they also didn't mention anything about people with disabilities. Again, even though these are things that have been promised.
Every time disabled people are left out of the equation and out of the conversation.
Yeah.
It's I want to say this as diplomatically as possible. I have a sense, and this has also sort of been rumblings I've heard from other disabled activists within the party, is that being particularly outspoken on disability-related issues within the party may be a factor for myself and for a few others as far as rejection by candidate search is concerned. Now, this is not something I have any hard evidence for. It's just a mixture of hearsay and assumptions. Well, but it would not surprise me at all.
I am a person.
Given that it's been a source of there's been some tension between party brass and disabled activists, particularly within the Ontario wing of the party.
Yeah, I am a person living with disabilities, so I get that feeling as well from what I've been hearing. And, people like me that have to rely on disability, we're desperate. $1,169 a month in Ontario. You can't live on that. I'm fortunate because, I can at least do these videos. It gets me some extra income. There are times when my mental health allows me to hold down jobs in very, very specific environments because, my mental health is not my friend when it comes to holding down a regular type job, like an office job. Like when it came to the campaign and being a candidate, that fired me up. That gave me energy. That gave me such confidence because I was fighting for people, for a reason. I had, all this belief that I could do this. And my whole way of thinking was different during that. So if I wasn't 100% confident I could be the candidate and handle it, then I wouldn't have put myself out there to begin with.
Yeah, I totally relate because for me, I've never been the most motivated in with things like school or other, types of work that I've had to do, just because, there wasn't much of a personal impact for me with it. I've always done well in school just sort of by coasting on my raw intelligence rather than actually, hard work per se. But when it came to me trying to run in this election, I mean, it was the thing that I hadn't worked on anything any harder in my entire life, just because this was something that I genuinely cared about so much, and frankly had so much fun doing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it sucks because I didn't put in a year and a half like you did, but I had been in contact with local optometrists, amid a row between optometrists and the provincial government. I even spoke to someone on the board of the Ontario Association of Optometrists. I was reaching out to various people and really getting out there and getting my name out there. Uh, and there's still a lot of inherent value to it. I don't regret the time that I spent doing that work. But it's especially painful because, I don't think I'd qualify for ODSP necessarily, but I'm also living with a few neurological disabilities. Um, and to see, I'm a young person, I'm a person who has disabilities and has, been fairly active in that wing of the party. It really sucks that, well, obviously it sucks that my own voice is not being able to get out there, but it sucks that a lot of voices like mine, people who experience all sorts of marginalization that I personally couldn't even imagine aren't getting the chance to put their names out there simply because, they're put through such an arduous process to even be given the opportunity to try and run.
Yeah. Like when I lost the first time, there was really just this sense that I've let down people in my own community because now they don't have that voice, people living with poverty, because one of the things they should be looking for in a candidate is possibly somebody who has experience living with poverty. Like that should almost be seen as an asset because we have a different perspective and take on things that needs to be heard. And it doesn't matter what riding you're in, people are suffering from this right now. They're suffering from the housing crisis right now. And so there was nobody there to speak on their behalf anymore. There was nobody there to speak about disabilities, the dire poverty we're in, the housing crisis. And it just went to the main center party issues that everyone was kind of covering.
Yeah, that local aspect is so important, not just because it's a better way to run an election campaign, but because, it's not just about getting an X number of votes. It's actually about getting out there and hearing from people and speaking to people in the community and spreading awareness about important issues, as well as raising class consciousness. And this was a big part of why I wanted to run, because I knew that even if I had been nominated as the candidate 6 months ago and had been able to, put myself into play, I still would have had a minuscule chance of actually winning the seat. But that was never really why I wanted to do it. It's funny, I'm actually quite the opposite of what you were just describing. I live very comfortably. I've never had to worry about a roof over my head, food on the table, and I mean, hell, my parents are paying my way through university. So compared to the average human being, I live with unparalleled comfort, and I've known that, since I was little. And actually being able to get out there and advocate on these issues because, I actually have the ability because of my privilege, that I can live with my parents for the month of the campaign. I don't have to worry about working at the same time. Right? Like I'm basically able to leverage the privilege that I have to actually try and do something good for my own community. And simply because it was something that I thought would be, ethical and just the right thing to do. And unfortunately, because I've been rejected, like we're not going to have as much of a capacity to actually get out there and hear from people and speak with people about these important issues. So it's a shame.
Yeah, they're rejecting the most passionate people, like the strongest fighters. They're rejecting them. And then they're leaving the searches to the last minute to the point that they're parachuting in people to certain ridings and stuff. And but what I kind of want to know at this point is how do we get the party out of this? Like, how do we change? Because again, there are still so many people within the party who are fantastic, who are outspoken, who are able to get in before this clampdown type thing on people that tend to be more progressive. And I don't know how we can work around it when they're not even voting in their candidates. The riding associations are being overlooked. Like, yeah, I don't know how we can get the NDP back on the track that most of the base of the NDP wants it to be.
Yeah, and that's the question I've been grappling with for the past year or so, because since I've really known that the NDP as an institution is something that needs some real change from within. I think it's got to be a sort of a very multi-pronged approach. Passing resolutions at conventions like barely does anything, but it's a tiny little thing. Electing good people to the various party committees and the party executive is something. But the problem is that stuff specifically like with candidate nomination and vetting, as well as central campaign decisions, that's all done by staff, right? You can't really organize the membership to change that directly. It's sort of just something that has to come alongside a change in culture and probably a change maybe in leadership as well, since I think everyone knows that unless and potentially even if she becomes premier, Andrea is not going to be continuing as the leader of the Ontario NDP after the election. So, hopefully we get some new people up at the top, not just the leader, but also in some of the top staff positions. But I think the best thing that we as members can do, and doesn't mean that this is the most optimal thing that all of us ought to be doing is in terms of like what's the best way we can give back to our communities, but I think we on the local level on the ground just need to be focused on getting actually good work done regardless of what's happening with the central party. Just actually start doing some community volunteering, try and see if there's any local mutual aid initiatives that you can be, or maybe tenant organizing that you can be a part of. And this is something that I wish I had started a year ago myself, just with school and everything and not having a very large team. It's hard to actually get that sort of thing off the ground. But I think rather than trying to ask the party to formally empower the members and formally empower the riding associations, I think we just need to start empowering ourselves.
Yeah, that sounds like a good start. Okay, well, it's been great having you on. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
And hopefully when we talk again, it's under better circumstances.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Sandy. And if you're listening to this conversation, subscribe to Left of the Box. She didn't ask me, or they didn't ask me to do that.
Great, thanks. So that was the interview. I hope you found it informative, and hopefully we can start fighting for some change. I still encourage people to get involved, if they find somebody that they think would make a good candidate, support them. Hopefully the day will come where the NDP starts shifting towards more of where the base wants them to be, which is, when you look at the issues broken down issue by issue, is actually where most of the country wants to be. I hope for the day that the NDP actually starts representing those values again. Until then, as a means of harm reduction, I will encourage people to vote for them, because the Liberals and the Conservatives are federally, provincially, they are horrible. Please don't forget to hit buttons. There's lots of them. They like to be clicked. That's why they're there. You can follow me on Twitter, and if you have the ability to help me out financially, I would greatly appreciate it. You can become a Patreon, link in the description box below, or you can check out my Amazon wish list and help me build my studio. Maybe get me some new box lights. I've been getting some feedback. Apparently I look like a vampire, which is not an insult. I dress up like one every Halloween, so. But yeah, it would still be nice to get better lighting. And a special thanks to those of you who have already become patrons. Your faith in me keeps me going. Salut, à la prochaine. Thank you for watching and stay tuned. I'm Sandy, wishing your tomorrow is better than your today.